The Whispering Woods. In the small, quiet town of Ravens Hollow, there was a legend passed down through generations, a legend of the Whispering Woods. The townsfolk knew better than to venture into the dense, foreboding forest that bordered the town, especially after dark. The stories told of strange whispers that could be heard among the trees, luring people deeper into the woods, never to be seen again. Lily had heard these tales since she was a child. Now, as a skeptical teenager, she dismissed them as nothing more than superstitions. She loved the thrill of the unknown and was determined to explore the forest and debunk the myth once and for all. With her friends, Mark and Jenna, she decided to venture into the Whispering Woods on a crisp autumn night. The moon hung low, casting eerie shadows that danced among the trees. The trio walked with flashlights in hand, their beams slicing through the darkness. The forest was eerily silent, save for the crunch of leaves beneath their feet and the occasional hoot of an owl. As they delved deeper, the silence grew oppressive, wrapping around them like a shroud. "Do you hear that?" Mark whispered, stopping in his tracks. The other to strain their ears. At first, there was nothing, but then, faintly, came a soft murmur. It was almost like a sigh, barely audible but unmistakable. It seemed to come from all directions, echoing through the trees. "It's just the wind," Jenna said, though her voice wavered. But as they continued, the whispers grew louder, more insistent. They spoke in hushed tones, unintelligible yet filled with a sense of urgency. The friends exchanged uneasy glances, the bravado they had felt earlier rapidly fading. They came upon a clearing where the moonlight illuminated an ancient, gnarled tree standing alone in the center. Its twisted branches reached out like skeletal arms. Beneath it, the ground was covered in a thick layer of leaves, and in the middle of the tree's trunk was a hollow, black as pitch. "Maybe we should turn back," Mark suggested, but Lily shook her head. "No, we're already here. Let's just take a quick look around." She moved closer to the tree, her flashlight revealing deep gouges in the bark, as if something had clawed at it in desperation. As she neared the hollow, the whispers intensified, swirling around them in a cacophony of voices. Lily peered into the darkness of the hollow and saw something glinting inside. Reaching in, she pulled out an old, rusted locket. The moment she touched it, the whisper stopped abruptly, replaced by an eerie silence. Jenna shivered. "I don't like this. Let's go." Lily nodded, slipping the locket into her pocket. As they turned to leave, a cold wind swept through the clearing, and the whispers resumed, louder and more frenzied. The trees seemed to close in on them, their branches like grasping fingers. Panic set in, and they broke into a run, the forest a blur around them. But no matter how far they ran, the clearing remained behind them, the ancient tree standing as a silent sentinel. The whispers grew deafening, a chorus of despairing voices pleading and accusing. Suddenly, Lily stumbled and fell, the locket spilling from her pocket. The moment it hit the ground, a figure emerged from the hollow tree. It was a woman, her form translucent and shimmering, her eyes hollow and filled with sorrow. She reached out to Lily, her touch like ice. "Help me," the ghostly figure whispered, her voice blending with the others. "Return what was taken." Lily, trembling, picked up the locket and held it out. "What do you want?" The figure pointed to the hollow tree. "Place it back." With shaking hands, Lily placed the locket inside the hollow. The whispers ceased, and the air grew still. The ghostly woman gave a sad, grateful smile before fading away. The friends stumbled out of the clearing, finding their way back to the edge of the forest as dawn broke. They never spoke of what happened that night, but they knew the truth of the Whispering Woods. It was a place of lost souls, seeking to be heard, to be found, and to have their stories told. And from that day on, the townsfolk of Ravens Hollow had ventured into the Whispering Woods, heeding the whispers that warned of the forest's dark secrets. Story to the house on Blackwood Hill in the town of Blackwood, a place veiled in mist and shadow. There stood an old mansion on a hill. It had been abandoned for as long as anyone could remember. The townspeople spoke in hushed tones about the house, known as Blackwood Manor, and the terrible events that had occurred there. Some claimed to see lights flickering in its windows at night, while others swore they heard screams carried on the wind, but none dared to approach it, let alone step inside. It was a chilly October evening when three friends, Ethan, Sarah, and Ben, decided to do the unthinkable. They were adventurous teens with a taste for the supernatural, and the allure of Blackwood Manor was too strong to resist. Armed with flashlights, a camera, and a notebook to document their findings, they set out for the house. Just as the sun dipped below the horizon, the manor loomed ahead, its dark silhouette framed by a sky streaked with the last light of day. As they approached, the air grew colder, and an unnatural silence fell over them. The gate, hanging loosely on its hinges, creaked eerily as they pushed it open. Weeds and dead plants choked the path leading up to the grand entrance. "Creepy enough for you," Ben joked, but his voice held an edge of nervousness. Ethan nodded, trying to maintain his bravado. "Let's get this over with." They stepped onto the porch, the wooden boards groaning under their weight. The door, surprisingly unlocked, swung open with a soft push, revealing a dark, cavernous interior. The beam of Ethan's flashlight cut through the darkness, illuminating a grand foyer covered in dust and cobwebs. A massive chandelier hung from the ceiling, its crystals dull and lifeless. "Okay, let's split up and cover more ground," Sarah suggested, her voice steady despite the chill in the air. "Ethan, you take the upstairs. Ben and I will check the ground floor." Ethan hesitated, but agreed, climbing the grand staircase that creaked with every step. Sarah and Ben moved toward the drawing room, their flashlights casting long, ominous shadows on the walls. Upstairs, Ethan walked down a long hallway lined with closed doors. He chose one at random and pushed it open. Inside was a bedroom, frozen in time. A four-poster bed stood against one wall, its once luxurious drapes now tattered. An old, ornate mirror hung above a dresser, its surface clouded with age. As Ethan shone his flashlight around the room, he felt a sudden chill, as if someone was watching him. He turned, and for a split second, he saw a figure reflected in the mirror, a woman in a long dress, her face twisted in anguish. Downstairs, Sarah and Ben explored the drawing room. It was filled with antique furniture, covered in white sheets. A grand piano stood in one corner, its keys yellowed and cracked. On the wall above the fireplace hung a portrait of a stern-looking man and a woman who appeared sad, her eyes hauntingly lifelike. Ben, feeling brave, pulled the sheet off an armchair and sat down. "This place is a goldmine for ghost stories," he said, trying to lighten the mood. Sarah nodded, but her attention was drawn to the portrait. The woman's eyes seemed to follow her, and a shiver ran down her spine. "Do you think the stories are true? About the family that lived here?" Ben shrugged. "Probably just legends. But who knows?" Suddenly, a piano key struck a single, haunting note. Both of them jumped, their flashlights swinging wildly. The piano remained untouched, its lid closed. "Let's get out of here," Sarah whispered, her fear now evident. Meanwhile, Ethan's exploration led him to the master bedroom. He pushed open the heavy door and stepped inside. The room was dominated by a large, canopied bed. On the nightstand, an old, leather-bound diary caught his eye. He picked it up and began to read. The entries were filled with despair, telling the story of the family that had once lived there, the Blackwoods. The father, driven mad by grief, had taken his own life, while the mother, overcome with sorrow, had vanished one night, never to be seen again. As he read, Ethan heard a soft sobbing. He turned and saw the same woman from the mirror, standing at the foot of the bed, her translucent form shimmering in the dim light. Her eyes were filled with tears, and she reached out a hand towards him. "Help me," she whispered, her voice echoing with anguish. Terrified, Ethan stumbled backward, dropping the diary. The woman advanced, her form flickering. Ethan bolted from the room, running down the hallway as the sobbing grew louder, filling the entire house. Downstairs, Sarah and Ben heard Ethan's footsteps and the eerie sobs. They met him at the foot of the stairs, his face pale and eyes wide with fear. "We need to leave, now," Ethan gasped. Without questioning, they ran for the door. As they reached the porch, the door slammed shut behind them with a deafening bang. The house seemed to sigh, the oppressive atmosphere lifting slightly as they stumbled down the path and through the gate. They didn't stop running until they reached the safety of their homes, the haunted cries of Blackwood Manor still echoing in their minds. From that night on, the friends were haunted by the memories of their encounter. They never spoke of what they had seen, but they knew they would never forget the chilling whispers, the ghostly figure, and the tragic story of the house on Blackwood Hill. The legend of Blackwood Manor grew even darker, and the townsfolk kept their distance, knowing that some doors should never be opened. Story 3: The Haunting of Briarwood Asylum. In the heart of the remote countryside stood Briarwood Asylum, an imposing structure shrouded in mystery and darkness. It had been abandoned for decades, its once grand facade now crumbling and overgrown with ivy. The asylum was notorious for the horrors that allegedly took place within its walls, stories of cruel treatments, unexplained disappearances, and anguished spirits that lingered long after the last patient had left. Despite these tales, its sinister allure drew the curious and the brave, who often regretted their visit. One cold, windy night, a group of 5 friends decided to explore Briarwood Asylum. Sarah, the leader of the group, had always been fascinated by the paranormal. Her friends Jake, Emily, Mark, and Lisa shared her interest, though they were less eager about venturing into the asylum. Armed with flashlights, cameras, and a Ouija board, they set out on their journey. The drive to Briarwood was filled with nervous laughter and attempts to scare each other with ghost stories. But as they neared the asylum, the atmosphere grew tense. The building loomed ahead, its silhouette stark against the moonlit sky. The wrought iron gate stood open, creaking eerily in the wind. "This place gives me the creeps," Lisa whispered as they stepped through the gates. "Come on, it's just an old building," Sarah said, though she felt a knot of anxiety in her stomach. They made their way to the front entrance, the heavy wooden doors ajar. Inside, the air was thick with dust and decay. The beam of their flashlights revealed peeling wallpaper, broken furniture, and scattered debris. They moved cautiously through the foyer, their footsteps echoing in the vast emptiness. "Let's split up and cover more ground," Sarah suggested, though the idea made everyone uneasy. "We'll meet back here in an hour." Reluctantly, they agreed. Sarah and Jake headed upstairs, while Emily, Mark, and Lisa explored the ground floor. The building seemed to groan and sigh as they moved deeper into its heart, the wind howling through broken windows. Upstairs, Sarah and Jake found a series of patient rooms, each one more unsettling than the last. Rusted bed frames, torn mattresses, and scattered medical instruments littered the floors. The walls were covered in strange, illegible writings, scratched into the paint. They came upon a room that seemed different, larger and more ominous. In the center was an old operating table, its surface stained with rust and something darker. "Look at this," Jake said, pointing to a set of restraints attached to the table. "This must have been the surgical ward." Sarah shuddered. "Let's take a few pictures and move on." Meanwhile, Emily, Mark, and Lisa discovered the asylum's recreation room. It was filled with decaying furniture and an old piano, its keys yellowed and cracked. A sense of sadness hung in the air, as if the room still held the memories of those who had once found solace there. "This place is depressing," Emily said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yeah, let's keep moving," Mark agreed. As they continued their exploration, a chilling breeze swept through the room, extinguishing their flashlights. Panic set in as they fumbled to turn them back on. When the lights flickered to life, they found themselves in a different room, a room they hadn't entered. The walls were lined with shelves filled with dusty jars, each containing unidentifiable substances. "What the hell just happened?" Lisa asked, her voice trembling. "I don't know, but we need to get out of here," Emily said, fear gripping her. Upstairs, Sarah and Jake had similar experiences. They felt a cold presence behind them, heard whispers that seemed to come from the walls. The temperature dropped suddenly, and their breath became visible in the frigid air. As they turned to leave, they saw a figure at the end of the hallway, a woman in a tattered hospital gown, her eyes hollow and empty. "Run!" Sarah screamed, grabbing Jake's arm. They bolted down the hallway, the woman's mournful cries echoing behind them. They stumbled down the stairs and burst into the foyer, where they found Emily, Mark, and Lisa, their faces pale and eyes wide with terror. "We need to leave now," Mark yelled. Together, they ran for the exit, but the door slammed shut with a deafening bang. The air grew heavy, and the whispers turned into anguished screams. Shadows danced on the walls, moving with a life of their own. The friends huddled together, their flashlights flickering and dying one by one. "We have to find another way out," Sarah said, her voice shaking. They moved through the asylum, trying doors and windows, all of which were inexplicably locked or boarded up. The building seemed to twist and turn, leading them in circles. Desperation set in as they realized they were trapped. In their frantic search, they came upon the basement stairs. A sense of dread washed over them, but it was their only option. They descended into the darkness, the air growing colder with each step. The basement was a labyrinth of damp, narrow corridors filled with rusting pipes and flickering lights. At the end of one corridor, they found a heavy metal door slightly ajar. Inside was a room filled with old medical equipment and records. On a table in the center was the Ouija board they had brought, though none of them remembered setting it up. The planchette was moving on its own, spelling out a message, LEAVE. It spelled over and over. "We're trying," Jake shouted, his voice echoing off the walls. Suddenly, the room grew silent. The only sound was their ragged breathing. Then, from the shadows, figures emerged, patients and staff, their eyes empty and lifeless, their forms translucent. They reached out, their faces twisted in pain and sorrow. "Help us," they whispered in unison. Panic overtook the group, and they bolted from the room, racing through the corridors. The spirits followed, their pleas growing louder and more desperate. The friends finally found a staircase leading up to a small door. They burst through it, finding themselves outside, the cold night air filling their lungs. They ran until they could no longer see the asylum, collapsing on the ground, gasping for breath. The night was eerily silent, the asylum looming in the distance like a dark sentinel. "We need to tell someone," Emily said, her voice trembling, but they knew no one would believe them. The townspeople already knew the stories of Briarwood Asylum, and another tale of terror would be dismissed as just that, a story. The friends never returned to Briarwood, and they rarely spoke of what happened that night, but they knew the truth. The asylum was haunted by the spirits of those who had suffered and died there, their souls trapped in an endless cycle of torment. And as long as Briarwood Asylum stood, the spirits would remain, waiting for the next group of curious souls to venture into their domain.